We've got a question from Gahan Lorenzo. They've asked, could you say something about the survival pending revolution programs and their relevance to austerity?
Yeah, I can say something about that. um, these programs were designed to deal with poverty in the United States. That's why I told you austerity, long-term austerity, is in fact policy decisions by the state and the structure of the economy. And so the Black Panther Party in 1966, well, 67, I'll say, created the survival programs, and there were. I'm not an expert on it. My wife is much better than I am, but in talking about these, but there were 38 such programs, and I can't tell you what every program was, but I'll just say, of course, you know about the free breakfast for children program, and there was free housing, free food, and free shoes, and free some of everything, and eventually, and this is over the course of time now. We're not talking about all at one time. It was created. There was a free medical service program. In fact, the Black Panther Party came up with the method to cure sickle cell anemia. And it's something to think about. A small organization of 5,000 members came up with first a tracking method, and a cure for sickle cell anemia that was endangering the lives of millions of Black people, and even some other people from the Mediterranean, as I understand as well. But they were threatening. It was threatening their lives, and they were dying at the age of 35. And people were terrified that they would die young, and the party got involved with it. Now you got to understand that mainstream medicine didn't know about it or didn't care about the program. It was considered to be a Black disease. Well, let them die. We hate them anyway. And so the party started dealing with it, and they started coming up with a cure. And then there were other Black doctors and Black doctors associations that united with them, and they came up with effectively a cure for sickle cell anemia that the medical establishment didn't care about, didn't know about, and didn't know how to treat. They came up with it. Black people came up with a solution, and especially the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party, out of this, created a nationwide medical program and had facilities to treat people in 13 cities. And, this was just unheard of. A group with no money hardly at all, and, without any trained medical doctors, but a few, and volunteers were able to come up with a national program first to detect the disease, and then to come up with something to have a line of treating it. People did that themselves. They didn't require the government to do it, and it's an extremely important example. Now, as I said, it was 38 programs. I don't know them all, but they dealt with every aspect of life. To try to take people off the streets, to try to give people food to eat. There were, people used to have the party used to have in cities all over the country free grocery giveaway, free food giveaway. And they would give away bags to hundreds of people, whoever came, however many came. They would give bags of groceries to them, and also would give them political education. Of course, they had to hear about how they got in this predicament of being impoverished, how they got in a situation where they didn't have food, how food is controlled by the rich and the corporations and so forth. They explained all this stuff to them, and so they got food of two different types. They got the physical nourishment, and they got the political nourishment of the brain. So, and this happened for a long period of time, my friends, a long time, years. And the Black Panther Party, I was just talking to my wife about it last night. She said that it lasted from 1966 to 1982, because the last program was the Oakland school. I can't remember. Oakland Community School, I'm sorry. That was the last program that died out. And so they were an effective organization, and they had reached a lot of people. in this country. They became a major presence in the United States. They weren't only one, of course. You know, there was a time when all kinds of black organizations existed, including black militant organizations. But they were, although they were part of the, you know, essentially part of the Black Power movement, although many people don't like that. They don't like the identification. But they nevertheless came up with these programs, and these programs lasted until they disbanded the national campaigns, the national chapters. Until they did that, those campaigns were in existence and really effective.
So the next question is from Michael. He says he saw that a young black girl nailing the black prosecutor who let the cop killers of Breonna Taylor off. The voice of revolutionary youth publicly unmasked, and he asks how far advanced is the movement in recognizing the reactionary role of black opportunism, and how is it being challenged?
You know, it's kind of interesting that in the three states that you know, that at least the three have gotten all this publicity, George Floyd in Minnesota, you know, the man was shot in Kenosha, and of course in Louisville. All of them were black prosecutors. You know, some people believe that the fact that black prosecutors or black cops or whatever, that makes a difference in how the so-called justice system is conducted. And these people are just fronts. They are fronts, agents for the same racist authority that existed before they got in office. And it's going to be that way until this system itself is overthrown. So these black faces in high places have no value whatsoever. And so, of course, I'm talking about in terms of the government. You mentioned about the police shooting and so forth, and the district attorney. No, these people are part of the problem. They're part of the system. You should make no mistake about that. Now, everyone doesn't recognize it, but I think a large section of the black community does recognize it. And I also think that tragic events like this educates large numbers of black people, particularly, so they will not have the faith or the misplaced faith in the government and the state, thinking that somehow they're going to protect their rights or they're going to give them justice.
On to the next question from Beth. And Beth says, Lorenzo mentioned that the original Black Lives Matter group became a front for the Democrats. And she asks, where does he see the latest wave of the Black Lives Matter movement going in the future?
You know, after a time, the thing that, you know, you get older and you supposedly get wiser, and so you're in a position where you can see through the con, you can see through the tricks that the state uses, right? And one of the things that they do is they create movements for you, and they'll create these movements. They know in advance that these movements are not going to fundamentally challenge the capitalist state itself. They may talk about ending state violence and all that, but they're not talking about ending the state or ending the financial sector that supports them. So it's important to understand that. I'm not making something that is just an overt attack on a group or whatever. I look at movements to the core of them. What do they represent and who do they represent? And what kind of leadership do they have? What kind of organization do they have? And the fact of protests alone, we need to go beyond protests. We need to go to the point of reconstructing this entire society. We need to end the system of capitalism. Because as long as you have capitalism, you will have police. That's just a fundamental fact. And we're not teaching people this. And I think this is one of the failures of these kind of movements. They come along at a particular point in time, you know, and make, you know, and I consider making the noise about it, but they're not fundamentally changing the system. They want to take and defund it, as they say. But what does that really mean in the final analysis? The same racist cops and the unions are going to be in a position to fundamentally run things. In fact, we're at a dangerous stage now that the cops have come to the conclusion that what they need to do is to take the power from the politicians and have it where the police unions, especially, and that's who saves these cops when they get charged with a crime or whatever, they want to be able to have it so that the police unions run the city police. And that would be a very dangerous situation. Then you talk about even more police killings. You talk about an outright death squad, that the police would be an outright death squad if they are not already. But they'd have essentially political control that the mayor and the city council and all them have now, and the cops could just decide to do anything they wanted to and not have any repercussions. Not that they're having very many anyway. But I don't think that we've reached the stage yet. See, the difference is somebody tried to say that the Black Lives Matter is like the Black Panther Party for this generation. No, it's not. Black Panther Party was a revolutionary organization. They advocated for socialism. They believed in armed self-defense, and they weren't in bed with the state. Like many of these organizations are. I talked to you about how certain left forces are captured by the Democratic Party, particularly. They're captured by the Democratic Party. And they're never the same kind of group after that. They essentially have sworn off on the goal of destroying capitalism. And instead, they are looking for an avenue to be empowered within the state, to be a capitalist caretaker.
Next question's from Becca. They say, hi Lorenzo, I'm a bit camera shy, but I was really moved to hear you speak. I've recently read Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala, and the whole book makes the link between racism and class divides in the UK and how the two relate. I've not had any experience of actively protesting, but I do feel like education alone isn't enough in times like this, especially given the state being hell-bent on their reign of austerity in the UK. What advice do you have for anyone young and angry who wants to make a difference and actually be heard?
Well, I will say that if you want to be heard, you got to get out in the streets. You don't necessarily have to have the same program somebody else has got, but you got to get out in the streets. That much is for sure. I have a terminology I've been using quite a lot lately called become ungovernable. We have to become ungovernable to the state so that the state does not control our lives, does not control our communities. And to do that, we need to start building a revolutionary presence in this period right now. And we shouldn't give any credence whatsoever to either of the political parties, whether it's in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats. And you should read the criticism of Malcolm X, what he made about the Republicans and the Democrats. It's one of the best criticisms I've ever seen. He used a very few number of words to do it. He didn't take a whole book. And they have the same goals. And so if we're going to build anything, we can't depend on these political parties, whether they're in the UK or the United States. They really represent the same thing, and that is the rich. Let's be quite clear about that. And it's going to become more and more apparent just to what extent the police and these other institutions really represent the rich, because the rich are going to be, they are getting very antsy. They think they're on the verge of being toppled, and so they're ready to go to fascism. They're ready to use fascism. There's a split in the United States right now between the use of outright fascism with the Republicans and the forces behind the Republicans, the money in the end, and the bankers and all these other institutions, Wall Street and all these. So there's a split in the ruling class, and that split is being reflected in the so-called election. And although neither one of the forces in the election is going to result in any kind of drastic or revolutionary or radical change, either one of them is, but it has riled up masses of people who get behind this garbage, get behind this corrupt electoral system. I don't believe in the electoral system. I don't tell people that they should not vote and all that, because it was a right fought for. I just tell them that they're not going to get free under the electoral system. I have a saying I use it called "Vote for me and I'll set you free." And what it really means, it was a piece of a song by the Temptations back in the day. What it really means is that the cynicism of the idea that you're going to vote for this guy and he's going to set you free, or he's going to do this and that. That's essentially what the whole campaign of this guy Biden is. That's his whole spiel. And he's not the first one. There's been others, these so-called liberal politicians and all that. They don't represent anything. If we're going to get anything, we got to get on the street, kill us to death, or kill us, shoot us in the streets, or they're going to throw us in prisons in massive numbers like they've done black people and other people of color in the United States.
The next question is from Darren. He says, "Hi Lorenzo, I helped organise your meeting in Edinburgh 20 years ago, and your words then did indeed make a lasting impact on me. It's been a great pleasure to hear you talk again." And he asks, if you have any thoughts on how we can deal with capitalism co-opting the anti-racist struggle. Does it disarm the movement when the bosses are pushing their diversity agenda, giving speeches about Black Lives Matter, etc., while at the same time upholding the structures that maintain race and class oppression, and what we can do?
Well, we're going to have to build a autonomous, I'm not going to call it just left, but an autonomous radical tendency. That's one thing we're going to have to do. That's one thing we want to recognize the necessity of doing if we're going to defeat these people, because they have always an endless supply of con men and fake radical groups and all this kind of garbage. They got an endless supply of them, and they'll be looked upon favorably. They'll get publicity. They'll get all kinds of stuff, interest that you or someone in your neighborhood fighting for won't get. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to understand that we need to build something autonomous, an autonomous radical movement. You call it left, a new left, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. But we need to build that. And we can't depend on these people that we know are enemy agents, our class sellouts. We can't depend on these people. And this is something that I have found out the hard way, to be quite honest. But because I went through two different, maybe three historical periods, the 1960s and 70s, then the period after in the 80s and 90s and so forth, and then coming up to the current period, having looked at all of this and having understood how they have brought up fake leaders like Jesse Jackson and his campaign to mislead the masses of people. Did you know Jesse Jackson was responsible almost single-handedly for destroying the black movement in that period? We're talking about the 1970s and early 70s, and before Reagan got in office. He was one of the ones that pushed for the so-called Black Political Summit and all this garbage that was held in both Newark, New Jersey, and in Indiana, Gary, Indiana. And what that was, it was an attempt by the Democratic Party to get more black people back into the fold who had left and were in the streets raising hell. His job was to bring them back in, and he started his campaign, Run Jesse Run, and all this kind of garbage. And so this is how enemy agents work, and he's been followed by others, it's not, the big thing is not to name the individuals, is to talk about the way these things happen, you know what I'm saying? And so we need to form a movement with its direction, its orientation towards the masses of people themselves, and against the state and against the political parties and against every form of institution that oppose capitalism. That's what we have to do. And that effectively is what started to happen in the 1960s. There was essentially in 1968, you had a worldwide youth rebellion. And it didn't succeed in terms of destroying capitalism, but one of the realities that it did do is destroy liberalism, which was in control of capitalism at that time. And now we have to organize a different kind of movement to defeat fascism and crypto-fascism, all of which covers for capitalism.
The next question we have is from Mikey and Rachel. Do you see any way to get people involved in revolutionary organisations, as we, in a UK national anarchist group, are finding it difficult to encourage people to quote unquote join or become involved? We are finding lots of quote unquote protests, but no real organising.
Well, I've always said, and it's just me, and it's not extremely popular at this point, but I've always said that really what I call community-based, or in the States they call it community-based organizing. And even the Black Panther Party, what it effectively was an organization of revolutionary community organizers. And so they went in communities, you know, in the earlier civil rights period. This is effectively what the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee did. They went into communities and talked to the people, in many cases live with the people, and so forth, you know, and they were able to raise up a kind of movement that was independent of the establishment. Now, other things happened to undermine that, you know, and that's a story in and of itself. But if we're going to build something, it has to be an independent movement. It has to, you know, people have got to agree and decide on what kind of movement they want to build, and not be influenced by politicians, and not be influenced by what we call in the United States non-profit organizations. One of the things that the establishment did at the end of the 1970s, you know, the Black Power period, they created essentially non-profit organizations of all types, and you know, and many of which were political, you know, get people to join and support the Democratic Party and this, that, and the other. And that's why in the United States right now you have a great many groups under the control of the Democrats, and even the so-called radical tendencies. Many of them are in bed with the Democrats. You know what I'm saying? The Communist Party, you know, they've been in bed with the Democrats for years. I mean, you know, all in all, you've got these kind of things all over the world. I've seen it all over the world, places I've been. And if you could build an independent movement, and if you can link it to poor people, the plight and condition of poor people, and poor people won't trust just anybody because politicians have sold them out, you know. So it's that kind of situation.
We've got a follow-up question from Becca's boyfriend. As you mentioned fascism so much, it brings to my mind a quote by Karl Marx that fascism is one of the final forms of capitalism as it begins to die. Based on that, do you get a sense that at all that capitalism is coming to an end?
Well, it's not like fascism it comes up just because capitalism is in crisis. You know, capitalism has been written out so many times by lecturers and radicals and whomever. And of course, it is a stage of capitalism. It's supposed to be a terminal stage of capitalism. But fascism is created to save capitalism using, you know, means of military insurrection and insurrection to save capitalism. It's also designed to, you know, because to be quite honest, it's opposed to any form of democracy, so-called democracy. You know, it's opposed to that. And so the idea that a strong leader and his party would take control of the state, would totally destroy the capitalist structure, supposedly, and would have then the ability to create a new regime. That has been their propaganda line. But in point of fact and in historical accuracy, they're financed by the capitalists. You know, Hitler would not have been able to do all the stuff he did in Russia, or even become the figure he became, if it had not been for the capitalists themselves financing him and helping him get in position. Mussolini, all these guys were already in bed with the state. They had, Mussolini came out of the so-called Socialist Party and became a radical fascist theorist and organizer. And so we got to understand that, but basically got to understand this. Fascism is corporate capitalism, That's why you read Mussolini's stuff. He talks about it in a different form. He's not talking about the actual, he's talking about in terms of syndicates and all that. And he, but nevertheless, the idea is this. This thing that is created to save fascism. Save capitalism. Fascism is designed to save it. And they'll use means, any means necessary to do it. But it'll differ from country to country, to be quite honest. It'll differ from country to country. Even if you look at, the period of the 1930s, the kind of fascism that arose in Spain didn't follow. They had a civil war and they wiped out the left, true, but they didn't follow the same logic of Germany that tried for world insurrection and became part of World War II. They didn't do that. And even Mussolini, although he buckled under to Germany, he didn't want to do that because he knew they were likely to be destroyed. But he did it anyway. The United States right now is a different situation. It may bear the same. Well, don't get me talking about this whole similarity and so forth. Just that you asked a question about worldwide, and I think it depends on the nature of the crisis, how deep it actually gets. They are trying to save the system, and some have used it in the past. They tried to save the system, by reformist measures, using fascism as a tool is a way to do it with the cudgel, to beat you down, beat the people down, and make them accept the rule of capitalism at whatever wages they want you to work, or outright slave, or whatever. They'll use that as a means of social control.
Next question comes in from a member of the Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty, and they ask, can you recommend a Black autonomous online news group?
Well, can I recommend a Black autonomous news group? Well, let me put it this way. Black autonomy has been around since 1994. And a lot of this stuff is still up there. I don't know how current it is, but I don't use the organization page anymore. I use my Facebook page to put out what I want to put out. For years, I've been, I guess, the major or main theorist of Black autonomy. There are new groups around. There are several. I don't even know who a lot of them are. There are new Black anarchist formations, and so I can't hardly give you the information about someone else. I can just say, try to find some of the stuff on Black autonomy and stuff that I've written, some of the stuff I've written, and if you can, get on the Facebook page, and I've got material on that. And there's a Black autonomy profile on the web page, that you can go to as well.
The next question is similar to the previous. Beth asks, are there any groups organizing in the US that you are excited about?
Are there any organized that I'm excited about? Well, I'm excited about reorganizing or rebuilding Black autonomy. I'm excited about the second wave of Black anarchist organizations. I'm not as familiar with them. I'm just now getting to the point I'm making contact with them. But that's what I would tell you, because the potential of those movements is so great. Working together with them, we can change the entire anarchist movement. We can change the entire country theoretically, well, more than theoretically. In fact, we could change the whole country, and then have a better presence in the world. So that's what I would tell you. There are other groups around as well. I haven't been in touch with a lot of these groups, although I'm going to start doing it again. Since this is such a crisis, we are facing fascism in the United States, a consolidated fascism, and we have to organize. We have no choice but to organize. We have to organize, or we will essentially die, or even worse. And but I don't see at this point the kind of radical fervent that I saw in the 1960s, where I remember the Black Panther Party coming to existence. I remember making the contacts with them and so forth. And I was astounded with their positions on armed self-defense and beating back police terrorism and so forth. And they were calling for lethal, these measures that would be lethal with the police, off the pigs, man. Armed self-defense. You fire on the police just like you fire on anybody else. And they had a whole, of course, political analysis around that. And so I haven't seen that. I know there's some groups that are marching around with arms and so forth right now, some black organization. I don't know what their politics are. I don't even know if they have any politics. I don't know if they are a group that could be subverted and used for fascism to stifle the people, to crush the people, or if they potentially are a group that could represent a armed resistance to police terrorism and so forth. I will just say that I haven't seen them do anything. I haven't seen them get in front of the masses of people or arm the community, to defend themselves against police terrorism, against vigilante murders, white vigilante murders, or these white supremacist organizations who've been killing black people for quite some time now. I haven't seen them doing anything, none of these groups, to beat back these fascists. Although I will give credit to the Huey P. Newton Gun Club. On one occasion, they did stop some white supremacists from coming into the black community there in Dallas, Texas. But beyond that, I haven't seen anybody getting up and stopping these cops from killing people at random. Just haven't seen it. Black Panther Party used to go and stand there with firearms on their side or on their back, and read from a law book and tell the people that they didn't have to respond to the police. They didn't have to. Police couldn't do this. Police couldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? And the police were frightened of getting in an armed conflict with then and there. So they stopped a lot of this stuff from happening. And in fact, all these killings that are taking place now, all these things start really happening after the Black Panther Party was already made, as part of history. I dismantled. So bear these things in mind. And we just don't have a radical movement like that. Now, I believe that something's coming. Of course, if I'm still alive, I'm going to help make it happen. I'll say that.
So the last question we have is from Christopher. And he says, I know defunding the police is a big debate in the USA at the moment. I was wondering if your views on how we can make them more accountable and transparent, as long as they are an inseparable part of capitalist society. I have been interested in surveillance, and mobile technologies have come into play, not only as agents of state surveillance, but also as devices which can be used to record the authorities. In recent years, we have seen public citizens deploying drones, etc.
Well, here we come to the point of figuring out tactics from strategy. And strategy is the overall plan that you're going to employ to defeat whoever it is you're going to defeat. And, and you got strategies, different strategies that groups have employed. It might be the sit-ins, it might be, marches in the street, or any number of things. Or it might be armed self-defense. Defunding the police is a measure. Now, I don't know if this is true, but there's many people have been pointing out to me that, in point of fact, the ideas of defunding the police are a measure that was hatched by the Ford Foundation, which is a major capitalist think tank. And they wanted to use it because they didn't want people in the street talking about F the police and so forth and so on. And they didn't want people out there talking about dismantling the police and the state. They didn't want really radical slogans. Think about this, defunding the police. One is, how are you going to do that? Do you have a political will among those in power to do it? And then the police are not without their own political power base. That's one of the big things to be aware of. They got these major foundations, police foundations they call them, which are financed by the capitalists. They can give money to them and so forth, and they never have to, justify what they've done, giving these funds to them. They also, the police unions, as I talked about before, is really a threat. Now, I don't know how it is in the United Kingdom, to be quite frankly, but in the United States, these police unions, which are claims to be labor unions, these police unions are the entity that actually protects and keeps these murderous cops on a job. You know what I'm saying? They also are the ones who call for and support the most murderous types of police tactics. You know what I'm saying? What we're talking about in the United States in particular is one, paramilitary policing. Which came about as a result of the so-called war on drugs. They couldn't do it at the time when the Black Panther Party was in existence, because the Black Panther Party was a popular formation, and they had burrowed their way into the hearts of the people, and that's a fact. I'm not saying that it's some kind of rhetoric. They had actually built a mass base, and this was at a time when there was a new left and there was mass movements against the Vietnam War and all these things. All these things had a tremendous effect on the consciousness of the people. They were not in bed with the cops and the state and all this idea as much as they are now. So that's not a radical demand. That's not a radical demand really at all. It's a kind of demand that you put the struggle that's in the streets in the hands of politicians, in the hands of lawyers and other elements that want to save the state, save the system. You're not dismantling the police. You're not firing all these cops and creating something else. It's just like teaching a new trick to a dog or something, So we're not talking about actual social change, which is different. It's not that at all. And so really we need to rise up against that and critique it and start criticizing that whole ideology.
I'm just going to give you an overall idea about Action Against Austerity that organised this meeting with yourself. It's also for the people that have turned up for this meeting as well. Action Against Austerity was basically set up about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was comprised of various different groups, basically anarchist autonomous groups from all across Scotland. And the common name that we had was to represent the people in our communities with various issues, particularly welfare and welfare representation, which we call social security, and also for direct action when we've seen injustices through what we would call the Department of Work and Pensions, which would be your welfare organisations, the senior welfare organisations that supply the money. What we also did was work within the communities to help out. What I think you would call a food programme, but we have what we call food banks here, and it was to support them as well in the community through funding and fundraising. I have to say, Lorenzo, that we have a lot of input for the IWW in Scotland, which are really quite good at organising across the board, particularly for technical issues. And actually this Zoom meeting as well has been donated by them for this purpose. But also we've had to join in Dundee the general labour and trade union movement. And it's a sort of a dual-edged sword, if you like, because although we haven't got much time for the official trade union and labour movement, what it does is it gives us a source of income, if you like, that we could disperse at our leisure, which is a really good thing when it comes to working in communities. It saves us for outright fundraising and that, because these trade union and labour movements here in Scotland are really wealthy. And so this is what we have done in Dundee. There's been a lot of community issues that we support in that. And what we tried to do is, for the initial meeting that we had, there was representatives for right across the board, for sort of class war anarchists that would just go about with flags and stuff like that, to people that were really had to learn about how to fight the system by using the system against itself. And there's groups like ECAP and that in Edinburgh that have been really quite successful with this kind of thing. And we're finding more and more in this country, well, particularly in Scotland, that we have other groups popping up with the action against austerity, like the live and rent groups that fight for people for a fair and basic rent for a decent accommodation. So there is quite a lot going on here. And I think when I spoke to you on Messenger, you had said as well that it would be difficult to organise these things in America, because obviously austerity is racialised, we see it as an open problem here. Right across the board, we say that there's a way that we could tackle this and include in your, it's not right to say services, if you like, it's as in your agitation in the communities, our politics are introduced into that as well. And in that, we have a conflict between our ideas, our agitation, and our general thirst to help our communities develop, that we consistently get resistance, not only for the official government, if you like, but also for the labour and trade union movement, because they're these movements are that corrupt now that all they see is a job for the boys kind of aspect. And so we constantly battle that, because they use it as a bureaucracy against us, and they have done for a long time. And they use it as a bureaucracy and red tape when it comes to real struggle as well. So it's an agreement with what you have already said about you see a black cop or a black prosecutor or that. These trade unionists that are sitting there on these full-time jobs are just the same. They are your enemy, and we hope that, it's unfortunate, I have to say, that a situation like a world pandemic had to turn up for folk to start to realise how corrupt these organisations are right across the board. And it might just be that this pandemic will throw up the real seeds organisation and a real form of revolution for the benefit of the people, our people, that we see as class struggle in this in the organisation that we do. So that's just a rough, it would take me ages to go through it, because every single group that's involved in action against austerity has a different method of working. But the overall idea, action against austerity, is really good, and it's good for the fact that we've kept it going for so long. So that's just a rough overview on what we do. In every city in Scotland, there is groups that operate, some out with action against austerity, but in a similar fashion. So if people are wanting to join under the banner of action against austerity, they're quite welcome, and they would easily find out where these groups are in the different cities. So that's a wee update for yourself, Lorenzo. If there's anything you want to ask us on that, I'll try and enlighten you. Okay.
Yeah, it enlightened me. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to speak on here. I mean, groups like yours and really the things we're doing in the United States with Black Autonomy and other groups, we are groups that are situated in organizing poor people and that segment of the labor class that's ignored entirely by the conventional trade unions, just as you said.
Yeah.
And it's been a real, my thing of doing this is to politically educate people who see this and into understanding that, like many people around the world, we are forced at this point to cast aside the old methods of struggle, cast aside the groups that claim to have been radicalized back in the day years ago, and we have to build something new. And we're not always in a position to be heard, but we're going now into a deep class and economic divide. And the ideas that we raise today, and we might be speaking to 50 people, the time is coming where we'll be able to speak to millions in one way or the other. You know what I'm saying? Because the collapse is coming of this system, and we have to take advantage of that. And we also have to recognize that this is the moment. We're literally at the moment when we're going to have a worldwide depression. It's already starting. 61 million, like I said, 61.9 million in the United States are applying for unemployment. And that number is going to increase. And there's people starving to death. I mean, literally starving. They don't have any food. They're being thrown out of their houses and so forth. So people are at a desperate straits. And all the propaganda line of the presidents and the prime ministers and whomever, all that stuff is going to be going out the window, and people are going to look for other alternatives. And I'm not going to say that they're going to just find us, but what's going to happen is that the things we put out there is going to start reaching people, and then people are going to pick up on it, and then they'll start feeling. Then we've been in a position to really influence the outcome of this current historical period. I think that's really important to understand. Otherwise, we can't get to the point where this is politics as usual, or that nothing's going to change. In fact, everything is going to change. And a large part of it is because we're going to change it. And I say we, the class, this small organizations like our own right now, we're going to reach a lot of people. People are going to be asking questions, and they're going to test us as well as test the ideas we raise. So we need to understand that this is not in vain, not futile, not just the ravings of an old man, and so forth. But that I put out ideas out there that are starting to be picked up in the United States. It amazed me, actually. And new groups are coming into existence. And so I've got to reach them just like I'm reaching you tonight. I got to reach these new Black anarchist tendencies, got to reach other radical tendencies in the United States, you know, and so forth. But it's a worldwide struggle. We can't defeat capitalism in the United States alone. It can't happen, you know.
I think that's a point as well, is that we should have our universal solidarity, whereas we could point to things in America and say, well, look at the situation they're in and how they're tackling the struggle. And you could say, well, look at the people in Scotland and how they're tackling the struggle. And then we don't stop there. We go to Greece, or we go to these other countries where we have connections and say, well, this is how they're doing it. And then start combining these ideas and making it stronger and stronger all the time. You can. So
Yeah.
there we go. Wow.
Very good.
So, I think, are you tired out now after all this?
Well, I've got to go, unfortunately, and we'll have an opportunity, I hope, to talk again.
Yeah.
And as I said, I hope that something I've said here has some special relevance to some of the people who are listening. Yeah. Now, I know I came here 20 years ago. Came to Scotland 20 years ago, and spoke. And you know, I was happy to speak to people. I was happy to have the walkabout and so forth. And I was especially happy to meet those radical kids that were in Dundee, and they grabbed me up and they took me on to a speaking place. And they got to the speaking place and they said, the man told them, so you can't speak here, you can't do this. They said, we're hijacking this place. Yeah, so that's what they did. They effectively hijacked the place. And
the memories are still there, but thanks very much for joining us, Lorenzo. It's been really good to see you again. Very interesting and informative, and I hope you gave maybe something for us as well. But
yeah,
thank you for your time, Lorenzo.
Okay, thank you guys.
No problem.
Love and struggle. That's what I always say.